It's just like back in the day, a duel on equal footing between Austria and Germany. Who still remembers Cordoba? But whether these two crossovers can really deliver such an exciting match and whether the Austrians can come out on top, that's what you're going to find out in this video.
Cordoba, when was that even? You said, who can still remember? Could we even remember it ourselves?
It was definitely before our time, Howie, absolutely before our time. But yeah, it was a legendary match, no doubt about it. And you can really tell how successful Austria's football history is when now, 40 years later, people are still talking about that one day when Austria beat Germany 3-2 back then in Cordoba. And yep, that was our cheap excuse to kick off this comparison. But it is an interesting one. These Austrian and German crossover machines are actually really on par with each other. Both have nearly identical engine displacement, 895 cubic centimeters from a parallel twin, 898 cubic centimeters from a parallel twin. Same power output, 105 horsepower. So we figured down here in Spain while escaping the winter, hey, let's really put them through their paces. Definitely make sure to subscribe to the channel for more awesome videos from here in Spain. We did have good weather a few times, and even when we didn't, at least we ended up with some great stories. And now I'd say, let's talk about the bikes. Howie, you spent a lot of time riding the KTM 890 SMT. Go ahead and tell us about it.
So first off, I've already made 2 other videos about this bike. Just wanted to mention that right here in this video too. Everyone with a keen eye might have already spotted it. Our test unit is a pretty unique one. We picked it up from the KTM dealer here in Barcelona. And this seems to be one of their demo bikes that sees quite a lot of action. We've already got about 7,600 kilometers on the clock. And what's most noticeable right away is the tire setup. We're running a mixed set, a Michelin Power GP up front and a Pirelli Diablo Rosso 3 on the rear. Our guess, the stock Michelin rear was probably just completely worn out and they had to throw something new on this, and that was just what they had lying around. Definitely not something we'd recommend. We'd always go with a matching set of tires just to get that consistent and confident feel out on the road. Other than that, it's a totally standard 890 SMT, but with an unusually minimal spec. We don't have a quick shifter installed, and while we do have the cruise control button, it doesn't actually do anything. My assumption here is that this bike was running in that demo mode where you can test everything for the first 1,500 kilometers and then decide what features you want to unlock afterward. I'd guess that's exactly what happened here. Nothing was activated. Other than that, KTM 890 SMT Supermoto Touring. You can already tell from the name what this is about. It's supposed to bridge the gap between that ultra-agile KTM Supermoto handling and the comfort of a proper touring bike. Powered by the LC8C parallel twin engine, which they use across the board in Duke's Adventures and of course in this bike. And the result is a package that's a lot of fun on the road, but with real potential for touring too.
Let's quickly talk about the BMW now as well. Unlike the KTM, it's, as is usually the case with BMW press bikes, fully equipped. That means we've got the dynamic package on board, which includes the pro riding modes and the quick shifter. We've also got the comfort package with us, including cruise control and so on. So yeah, full spec. Even the center stand, which normally costs extra, is included. In other words, this thing is loaded to the brim. The F900 XR also has a bigger XR sister and shares its engine with the 900 GS models. I'd say it shares its base platform with the naked bike, the F900R, but this one is tuned more toward touring. And I do think these two bikes, the BMW and the KTM are definitely in the same general vehicle class. Let us know in the comments. Do they appeal to the same type of rider? Price-wise, it looks like this. The BMW is actually the cheaper bike, especially in its base form. In Germany, it starts at 12,300 euros. Even with both packages added on, you're looking at 14,300, and that's clearly below the list price of the KTM.
Exactly. In Germany, it sits at 15,000 euros without the additional equipment features, but you do have to say that many KTMs, especially a 2024 model like the 890 SMT, are currently available at promotional prices.
So in terms of price, the two bikes are closer than ever before, but how do they stack up when it comes to target audience? Maybe let's talk about the engines. On paper, they are very, very similar in terms of specs, but how would you judge their character? Do you think they appeal to the same kind of rider, or are they aimed at different groups altogether?
Good question, Gregor. So I find that the engine in the 890 SMT runs noticeably rougher than the one in the BMW. It's not quite as smooth, a bit more raw, I'd say, but in return it gives me noticeably more punch out of the lower revs compared to the BMW, and especially the throttle response is a bit gentler overall. When you're riding in sport mode here, you can still feel some load change, especially at low RPMs, but I think I felt that much more strongly on the BMW. Even in the regular road mode, I was a bit surprised actually that BMW didn't manage to smooth that out a bit better. But just in terms of character, I'd say the KTM engine is definitely the rougher one, the sportier one, the one that pushes you more, while the BMW's engine is noticeably more refined and really gives you a very smooth riding feel, at least once you're past that low transition zone.
I'm a big fan of this parallel twin from BMW, now in its 900 cubic centimeter version since the last major update, now also used in the F900 GS and so on. I think this engine, unlike what people might have criticized about BMW's older parallel twins, that they were boring, that's no longer the case here. This engine, in my opinion, has enough liveliness, a willingness to rev, and at the same time a pretty strong mid-range. We're also doing an interesting comparison between the F900 XR and the new Ducati Multistrada V2. Maybe check that one out too. And there we talk quite a bit about how surprisingly punchy this engine is. But the difference is exactly what you described. The KTM is rougher, a bit more aggressive in how it runs. Yeah, you definitely feel that. And I think the bigger difference is how long it can hold that punch. The BMW has solid pull, I'd say, from around 3,500, maybe 4,000 revolutions per minute up to about 6,000. There's definitely a surge there, but when you keep the throttle open, nothing much happens at the top end. On the F900 XR, you can definitely shift early, I think, and the KTM, despite also being a parallel twin, still manages to offer proper thrust for a much longer stretch. I'd say it starts at around 4,000 revolutions per minute and just keeps pulling all the way up to 8,000, maybe even 9,000. And that really gives it a significantly sportier character. Now about the throttle response, that's actually part of the 2025 update on the XR. The dynamic ride mode is now included as standard, whereas before it only had road and rain. And they also revised the throttle map, made it more direct. And honestly, I think that's a good thing. You don't need much wrist movement for a lot of forward momentum. That's exactly what you want in a sporty setup. But what I've noticed is that it introduces kind of an artificial load change effect. And I'm not a fan of that, especially in higher lean angles. When you want to gently roll on the throttle at the apex, you really have to focus so you don't get that little jolt. That's why I found my sweet spot on the XR by going with the dynamic pro ride mode, everything set to aggressive, but with the throttle response set to road. And that gives you just a tiny bit more smoothness, which means I don't have to overly focus on throttle control in deep lean.
Yes, I did try that, Gregor. You really had it set up beautifully. But since we are already talking about character, or rather characteristics, and which kind of people they appeal to, we also had a great chat beforehand about the ergonomics. That on the BMW, you do sit a bit more, how do you say, more cramped, yeah.
I'll just hop on real quick. I'm 1 meter 85 tall. and the knee angle is definitely on the sharper side for a touring motorcycle. It's okay overall, but it's really more about the space up here around the tank, the distance to the handlebars. You kind of feel like, I think the classic expression is monkey on a grinding wheel. So for people who are even taller than me, say over 1 meter 85, it's already starting to get a bit tight. It just feels a little cramped on the XR.
But at the same time, smaller people like me benefit from the fact that the seat is nice and low. You have a secure stand and you really feel very comfortable on the bike. So as a smaller person, 1 meter 75, I can appreciate that. But at the same time, the KTM is bigger, the handlebars are mounted higher. So let me hop on now with my 1 meter 75. Here I have the handlebars mounted quite high with a very wide handlebar as well. And the knee angle is much more relaxed. This means that even taller riders have more room, so it's less cramped, and the ergonomics are generally a bit more upright and open, which I think is nice, especially when leaning into corners.
Yes, definitely. I'd say these are the bigger differences where you can really make a concrete recommendation based on rider size, build, etc., and also rider type, because everything else clearly shows noticeable differences in the character of these motorcycles. But I find it a bit tricky to say this is for you and that's for you, because it's not that simple. For example, I think the KTM is where the KTM is too hard for me, the F900 XR is too soft. For example, here in Park Garaf, we often have these small speed bumps. Interestingly, on the BMW, I think it strikes a good balance between comfort and sportiness, still offering some basic comfort. But the issue is that, if anything, the rear becomes too soft once you push a certain pace with bumps, etc. And if I feel a bump, I definitely feel it through the front. With the KTM, it's different. The impact mainly comes through the rear. It's very stable, but at the same time, it's pretty stiff. So ideally, I'd like something in between for my taste. At the same time, for example, with braking, I find the BMW front brake okay. It has a bit too much play at the lever, but then the pressure point tightens up nicely and it bites progressively, so you can also brake quite finely. The rear brake, though, it feels like stepping into a bowl of dough. It's just soft with tons of slack at the lever, and then it bites slowly, mushily. The KTM, on the other hand, hardly has any slack. You have a little bit of play, but after that it gets really hard. And interestingly, even though it gets hard and you apply a lot of force to the rear brake, you don't get much braking power. So I take the braking power from the BMW, but with the lever feel of the KTM. So a sweet spot like that would be ideal for me. How do you see it?
Yes, I can hardly add anything to that. The BMW, especially at the rear, also felt quite soft to me, especially when you're leaned over and then hit a small bump in the road. You really feel the rear dive in, whereas the KTM does that less. And also with braking, I think the KTM is fittingly with its engine a bit harder, a bit rougher, but for that, I feel like the KTM has a much clearer pressure point, which I can better control to enter a turn.
I think, and now we're slowly getting to the final point, which is really important to me and also kind of the deciding factor in terms of who I'd recommend these bikes to. I decide that point is the handling. When you lean into a corner on the BMW, the front wheel kind of tips itself into the turn, almost steers in on its own. It feels completely intuitive and natural, I think, if you use your body to pull the bike into the lean, and especially if you lean forward a bit during that process, you can stay super relaxed on the handlebars and just guide the bike smoothly through the arc with your body. As I mentioned earlier, the suspension is really well done in general, the chassis feels good, and that was also part of the 2025 update on the XR. It got a revised, now adjustable fork. So you really get good feedback and can ride at steep lean angles. The Conti Road Attack 4 tires worked well too. A dream for sporty riding, but if you want to ride in more of a pressing style, which is definitely plausible for a touring bike like this, then you run into a thing, because the front wheel tips in a bit on its own, and since you're using counter steering to regulate lean angle, you need to apply a bit of constant counter pressure to hold that lean. And personally, I find that a bit uncomfortable over time. The KTM, on the other hand, with its super wide handlebars and that exposed exposed on top of the bike riding position. I think it lends itself even more to a pressing style of riding, fits more with the whole supermoto theme. And I think that's where the paths split depending on your own riding style, whether you feel more comfortable here or there.
I have to admit, personally, I just really like that upright riding position, a handlebar that comes up high and sits close to me when I ride, because that way I don't have to work as much with my body. I can just lean in nicely, ride in that pressing style, stay upright, keep my eyes on the line. So purely from a personal standpoint, I find the ergonomics and the handling of the KTM more comfortable because it's more front wheel oriented. But with the BMW, and you put it well, it's very harmonious. You can really ride it with your whole body. I think that's where you really need to test ride both, or at least know beforehand what kind of riding style you prefer, what you enjoy more, and use that to make your decision. So as you can see, it's not as clear cut as that famous match in Cordoba back in 19 something or other. Sorry to all the football fans out there. Was it Germany who won? Was it Austria? Who knows? It's not that easy to call. These are two very different characters that need to match the rider. So as you guys can see, the bikes are different. You really should test ride both to figure out what suits your life better. And maybe you already own one of the bikes. If so, let us know your experience down in the comments. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any more videos from here in moderately sunny Barcelona. Gregor and I thank you for watching. See you soon. Bye and baba.